Hi, everyone. Welcome to the March Wireside Chat. It looks like spring has finally sprung, at least here. It was like 65 degrees today. Incredible. And tomorrow it's going to be even warmer. Just really amazing. I wore a t-shirt today to work for the first time, probably since last October. Um, so anyway, I'm really happy to welcome back as my guest tonight, MFA instructor and bestselling author Melissa Marr. Melissa's most recent novel, Greta Gets the Girl, was published in January from Bramble, which is the romance imprint at Tor. And her novel, A Treason of Magic, which is publishing in June, is a Regency-era fantasy and the first in a duology. You can learn a lot more about Melissa and her upcoming works at her website, melissamarrbooks.com. And I'm going to actually throw that into the chat right now so that everyone can visit. All right, there we go. Welcome, Melissa.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming back. We had a great time last time. If you recall, we pulled out our swords and
Yes.
measured our swords against each other, squared off. I don't think we're going to do that this time. I don't think I was able to match your swordsmanship.
I think the good thing is that there is enough of a practical reason for learning sword fighting.
Yes.
That I can just call it, research.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's what we talked about last time was like when I was in college, I was on the fencing team and I learned enough about that kind of sword fighting. I fought with foil. And I learned enough about that type of sword fighting to really come in handy in my books when I'm writing about action scenes. And really almost any kind of action can be analogous to a sword fight. I mean, and I'm sure you found the same thing. It's just fantastic, experience to put to work in your fiction if you're writing like any kind of adventure, science fiction, fantasy.
Yeah, no, I mean it's chess. It's chess with a weapon. I
Yeah.
see in the chat that it says my audio is low. I'm very quiet as a person. I tried to adjust my mic. Let me know if that's not better.
I can hear you fine. Yes, it's
Okay,
much better.
okay.
All right,
Um,
excellent.
I had bronchitis last week, so I just came off steroids and my voice is subpar. So I do apologize if I'm too quiet. If I am, just drop it in the chat.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, weapons, I find it, I mean, I also find it really cathartic. Not even necessarily sparring, but going through drills. I often find when I'm stuck in my words, I need some sort of repetitive motion.
Hmm.
And so going through various of the cuts and guards with the longsword or the single hander serves the same purpose that working on my loom or baking bread or going for a kayak trip does. I need something to move the body so my brain forgets that it's actually solving the problem. So it's like if I distract my physical version of self, that the mental version comes clearer with writing. So that's actually why I started doing it for a book, but then I kept doing it because I found it really meditative.
Hmm. So you find that if you engage in that kind of physical activity, your unconscious mind will solve some of the writing problems that you might
Always.
not be able to solve otherwise.
Always. I mean, my family talks about taking me on walkies like I'm a dog,
Yeah.
because if I'm moving my body, it ends up that I just start relaxing. And I think that intellectually, a lot of times when I get stuck in a plot issue or what have you, it's because I'm stressing on it. And
Mhm.
it's the not seeing the trees because you're focused on the whole forest. And once I start moving, I relax. And once I relax, then the clarity I need for whatever story issue shows up. And Sword has been a great way to do that when I travel. I used to take walks. I'd actually post on social media and say, is anyone in the area that wants to walk with me? And my family explained to me that that's an incredibly dangerous plan.
Yeah, I was
So,
going to say.
yeah, so now you travel with a sword.
Now, do you ever find, I'm going to stick with the subconscious a little. And by the way, I want to invite our audience to please post any questions for Melissa that you might have in the chat. Well, actually, this post here in the chat by Michaela is sort of along the lines of the question I wanted to ask, so I'm just going to read it. I do something similar, she says. Whenever I'm stuck, I'll let my subconscious process it and I'll go about my life. Often I'll specifically think about it before sleep because I know my brain will work on it while I sleep. Do you ever find that you kind of go to sleep with the
Yes.
problem and then wake up with the solution?
Yeah, when I'm deep in the revision process of drafting, and I will admit that it really varies by publisher. Like when I've done books with Penguin, they have a very elongated revision process because my editor does primarily literary fiction there. Whereas my book with 47 North, I had 3 weeks to revise the book.
Right,
Um,
fast.
and it's very fast. So I will read the section that I'm stuck on and then I go to sleep. And that way, again, my physical self is doing something. So a
Hmm.
lot of times I dream my solutions. And I don't know if that's the most professional way to do it, but yes, showers are great for it. Like, I mean, I do Pilates. I have a Pilates reformer in the gym or in the house here. Um, weights. I don't know how to ride a bicycle, but I'm told that works well.
Try a stationary one.
Kayaking, exactly. I mean, it's just doing that thing, whether it's sleep or physicality. So you're
Hmm.
not, and I think I see that a lot with my thesis students. I was just reading some of their journals, and there's just this like worry that comes with writing that first book. And I would love to lie and say it goes away, but it doesn't. And so tricking myself to relax because I mean, all of us know the answers. We know our worlds, we know our characters. It's the trick. It's finding the way past the block that our anxiety is building.
So do you think
That's my
that,
take.
right? Do you think like for you is writer's block primarily about anxiety?
I mean, for the most part, um, I mean, in fairness, I have been publishing nonstop for 20 years. So, my very first book did stupidly well through no fault of my own. And the result of that is the publishers had this pressure, like they wanted another thing just like it. And I was like, I didn't mean to do it the first time. I have
Hmm.
no clue what I did there. And so that's the thing. I think the anxiety creates that block, you know. So yeah, I think a lot of it's anxiety tied to something. And often pressures, and I think it's worse when it's pressures from outside your body. Like
Hmm.
I do better on the books that I write half of before I sell them because then I know that they're going to give me a deadline and they don't know how much I already have written.
Right,
And so, like, it seems like I'm faster than I am because I've already got this lead time.
right.
So,
I think that's why for a lot of people, this was certainly true for me. Um, the second book is the one that they really run into a wall with, because like the first book, they had all the time in the world to write it, and it kind of, I don't know, for whatever reason, it's like it's your first novel, you pour everything that you've got into it. And then you sell it, and then suddenly the publisher's like, well, where's the next one?
right.
And well, just like you were saying, and they want the same thing, or in my case, they wanted something, better, and still, but it's just really difficult to kind of like deal with that pressure. I found it very difficult.
Definitely. And I think that's one of the things, like when I'm talking to the students about genre and thesis, and by the way, I'm skimming the chat and love how many of you that I'm
Hey,
seeing in here tonight.
yes,
Um,
a lot of your students are in here
I
tonight.
love my students. You guys are my cookie. Like the part of writing that is stressful, I partly compensate by teaching because it reminds me why I like writing. And so, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot with genre and thesis is like, how can you borrow time from the future to plan for that? So, right now, I have 3 different books that I've started. I'm not committed to any of them But like depending on the way the ebbs and the flows of market go, one of them will be the one I pick. So it's not
Hmm.
like I'm necessarily writing to market as much as like I'm writing starts of things. And if one of them absolutely grabs me and it's beyond market, or one of them grabs me and then when I finish the next thing, that's where the market is, I'm prepped. And so with like genre and thesis, I've been talking to the students about making sure that like we're really thinking about agents and editors or publishers that you might be interested in, that you're thinking about different ways you can spin your pitch, that you're paying attention to the comp titles, like all of that stuff, you're actually reducing the stress from down here by doing it now. So,
Hmm.
like on the days that I can't write, like I've been with my agent for 18 years and I still see who's hot out there. I mean, she could get hit by a meteor. You never know. So, I still pay attention to that and I keep files of what's going on to decrease the anxiety later.
Yeah, no, you're an incredibly, I guess I would say prepared writer. I mean, you do your due diligence. You sent me some charts recently that I found very interesting. I mean, you pay attention to what's going on in the market, um, and in the literary world, and you're always working. You've always got something going
Yes.
on, which I find incredibly admirable and really, really. I think that's, the example that you set for your students is really an important one because, if you want to make it as a writer, you really have to be hustling all the time these
And
days.
versatile. You have to think about the big picture. Like I see Kara over there mentioning that she's doing the gothic romance that started as a microburst, and someone else saying you're doing Hema. And like if it's a thing that you really dig, it doesn't feel like work. And to
Right.
be quite blunt, I'm not prepared because I'm like meaning to be. I'm prepared because I have lupus, and there are days that I can't get out of bed. So like if I work ahead and I have like it's like meal prep, right? Like if I have all the veg chopped, so the night that that the kids got a late practice or whatever's going on, it's not as difficult to still get it done because I've planned ahead. And with living with a chronic illness, between the lupus and my heart disease, I end up having to plan ahead. And
Hmm.
then that way, I mean, I know but they don't all know. I had a heart attack a couple months ago, and it was easier to get through because I had been prepping for a bunch of stuff because I had been going to the gym like almost every day. So when I did collapse, my body was prepared to bounce back. And I think that's something that makes sense in the writing world is if there's stuff we can do ahead. I mean, get on it. When the
Yeah.
sun is shining, make all the hay because
Yeah.
you know that illness is going to knock you back down. So I look prepared because I don't tell you the days that I can't get out of bed, you
Right.
know?
Right. But still, I mean, I don't mean to like embarrass you or anything,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's like real extraordinary willpower. That's what I think, you possess in spades. And I think that's a really great thing for a writer to have, that kind of
It
discipline.
is.
Yeah.
It is. And I will tell you guys, when you get to the part of dealing with publishing, it's also a pain, forgive my language, it's a pain in the ass to be organized because they are not going to be. I will say sometimes they are, like 47 North, which is an Amazon imprint. They came to the table with the best offer for my last book. And they have a schedule. Like I know exactly what date copy edit's coming before I even turn in the book. Like we are to the schedule. And that is atypical. Whereas with you mentioned Bramble, the book that came out from Bramble, it was 10
Yep.
months. I turned in the book and I'm like, dude, it's been 10 months. What are we
That,
doing?
right, because the different publishers have their different personalities, I guess you almost might say. I mean, Tor is not known in the industry for its speed.
Mm-mm.
Exactly. They'll make you wait, even
Yeah.
after they make you wait to accept your book, and they'll make you wait to publish it. Um, by and large, especially if you're a young author or a new
Yes.
author who's just been acquired by them. So one thing I do want to talk about, I'm
Yeah.
going to circle back to the thesis courses because I would like to talk about that a little bit too. But I want to talk about two things before we get there. And I guess they're sort of related, but one of which is the idea that, a lot of times you hear, um, publishers want, or actually a better way to phrase that would be to say that an author who is working in a number of different genres is possibly doing harm to their career by confusing the marketplace, I guess you might say. But you're kind of like a refutation of that common belief, because you write in a bunch of different genres, and not only do you write in a bunch of different genres, but you write in different modes, like comic book work, for example, which I hope we can also talk about. So can you talk a little bit about, like, where did that come from, that desire to write in, across all of these genres? And then number two, how do you make a success of it? Because you must have faced some resistance on the publishing side, or maybe from your agent, from
Yes.
somebody, surely, who was like, please just focus on this one thing.
Yes, I get a lot of that. Actually, there's a lot of resistance. So when I wrote Wicked Lovely, I was not planning on being a fantasy author. I certainly didn't know I was a YA author. Um, I wrote a book. That's all I did. And then I was told that I was fantasy and YA. And then it won Romance Writers of America's like YA awards. So suddenly I'm apparently a romance writer. None of that was my plan, like not even close. Um, I was just writing a book. I didn't have a plan. So my debut adult book ended up winning Best Horror of the Year for Goodreads. And there were people that were pleased with that. And they're like, so you write dark fantasy. Okay, that's what you do. So then I sold a middle grade. And they're like, okay, so you write fantasy. And so I sold a picture book called Bunny Roo, I Love You, um, which is actually one of my most successful books ever. We're at like 300,000 units out there. Um, Picture books do not pay well. Let me just throw that out there. I get like a quarter a book. So at that point, my agent is like, okay, stop. Just like stop. You need to build your brand. This is what a Melissa Marr book is. And I was like, well, I kind of thought if Melissa Marr wrote it, it was a Melissa Marr book. Um, and and that was apparently wrong. I was wrong what a Melissa Marr book was. So in a very responsible response to that, I sold a contemporary biker romance because I don't do well with rules. So then I sold Harley Quinn, graphic novel, YA again. I mean, I don't like boxes. Do
But
publishers like that?
that's
No.
your brand, Melissa. Your brand is like not to like boxes and to be contrary and busting out all over the place.
Yes, contrary is probably my brand. And there are publishers that I have to admit, there are editors that I don't think you could pay them to take me again because I don't like that. I didn't want to write to a brand. Um, on the other hand, it also has meant that when a market is soft, it doesn't hurt me the same way because I'm not doing one thing. I had a lot of
Right.
friends that when urban fantasy, paranormal romance crashed, suddenly they couldn't sell a book. And I was still selling books because I was doing middle grade or picture book. And I've had books that have completely tanked. And I've had books that have been surprise hits. But the long and the short of it is the big limitation is there are not many agents who can deal with you being in
Mhm.
a lot of boxes. So like if my agent were to die, um, I don't know, I'd have to pick some things that I didn't
Yeah.
do. And one solution we've talked about is like there are things I could do indie pub and there are things I could do trad pub and I could work it that way. My ideal is to be in like several different publishing houses simultaneously. So I believe in multiplicity of income streams. I have
Hmm.
indie income, I have anthology income, I have um, I have royalties, I have books that have been reissued. And by having that, I've been able to support myself solely by writing for 20 years. And I know that's unusual. So, on one hand, I understand that we're to build a brand. On the other hand, by choosing to approach it like an investment portfolio, I'm living off my writing. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's way cool. All right, let me pull a few questions out of the chat.
Yes.
Here's one. I'm self-published from 2016, but want to tap into the traditional publishing setting for some new books I've written. What advice do you have for someone who has submitted? And I assume by that, I don't know if that means that they've queried agents and are waiting to hear back, or have submitted to a publisher and are waiting to hear back. Jesse, maybe you can type in which of those you're referring to. I guess it doesn't really matter. She says both. So
Okay.
what would your advice be there?
I mean, for starters, the indie to trad pipeline is more robust than it's ever been before. There are publishers like Bramble that are actively scooping up people that hit the mark in KU in particular. One
And
thing to remember,
that's
though,
Kindle.
sorry, Kindle Unlimited.
So, and Bramble is a fairly new imprint, isn't it?
Yes, they've
Yeah.
existed 2 years. Monique Patterson, I had actually sold to Monique before the imprint launched. So I'm kind of an oddball in the imprint. But a lot of her authors are people that she found that were really succeeding in that market. And if that's the goal, I mean, what you get by going from indie to trad is you get distribution into indie bookstores, chain bookstores, occasionally Target and Walmart, and you can get foreign rights deals in a way that you can't doing strictly indie. So if your book has the potential to tap a current buzz market, that's useful. If not, I mean, again, separate income streams. I know a lot of people that have books that go indie and they have books that they approach traditional. And it really depends on which ones are having a stronger place in the market. And Paul mentioned having charts. I actually have a computer person friend who wrote a program to pull all the deals from different genres to show us the ebbs and flows of what's strong. But you can do that just by reading publishersmarketplace.com. So if it's a strong market, you can make money in both. Or if you have a book that's a breakout, like Carissa Broadbent is a great case study. She had 3 books, each of which were about 120 to 150,000 words. They came out within 18 months. They were exclusive to KU. She had built a fellowship before that. Those books exploded. Traditional publishers came to her. Bramble acquired her. And then suddenly she's got 7 different language deals. So in terms of how to tap that market, I think it's making sure that you're really on trend. And I think that's the hard part. Like, I believe in writing what you're passionate about, but I also believe in money.
What
So,
happens though, like, just to stick with this one question. So here's somebody who's like, they've been publishing indie for quite some time. And they've decided like, all right, I want to dip my toe into the traditional waters. I've done what I'm supposed to do. I've been submitting my queries out there, but I'm not hearing back from agents. So how long do you wait? I mean, because the temptation must be
okay,
there. Well, the heck with it. I'm going to just go back and
sure.
do what I know how to do, which is publish this indie.
I mean, if your real goal is to make it in the trad one and you're not hearing back, that means you either don't have a high enough concept or your query letter isn't working. A lot of times what agents are looking for is going to be less about the writing. I know that sounds terrible in an MFA program, but it really comes down to that, like, it's a high concept. It's a moneymaker for them. And
Is that what you
so,
mean by high concept? Is like something that will sell and be
yeah,
a moneymaker? Okay.
yeah. It's not the same story we've read 50 versions of.
Right.
Or if it is, you're spinning it in a new way. Like Heated Rivalry is real hot right now. Sapphic Heated Rivalry, I think, is a query pitch that would pick something up. We're seeing some Sapphic books go through, but we're also seeing Heated Rivalry. So there is a market coming together there. So if you're not getting the response, that means your query letter isn't doing its job of getting attention, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So I would focus on shifting that. And if you are already making money in in the independent market, do a different book there. If you really want this, if you think this is your crack book, this is the one that's going to crack that door, then you focus on a different book over here while this one you're pushing there, because it could take up to 8 to 10 months. Agents are swamped.
Yeah.
And live pitching, though, gets you through those doors faster. So if it's at all physically and economically possible to pitch live, like whether it's at like horror writers or international thriller writers, any of those pitch fests, you get faster response times because you're getting them face to face at a conference.
Yeah. All right. Let me pull another question out of here. Do you think self-publishing is better? Well, I guess you sort of answered that. But the question is, do you think self-publishing is better than traditional publishing? I heard you still have to promote it as if you self-published. What is best for a writer who's broke like myself and someone who wants to eventually become a professional ghostwriter? You know, it's so interesting. Angel was one of my students in 505 a few years ago, and she is consistently listed as one of her goals as a writer to be a professional ghostwriter. And I find that so fascinating because I know a lot of ghostwriters, and I believe, you know, you have, you know, stuff
I
that you
have
can
some
say
things there.
about that as well. But it's like, I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't think I know a writer who wants to be like a full-time ghostwriter that wants ghostwriting to be their main thing. You know what I mean? Instead of like being a sideline.
I mean, so I took up my first ghostwriting gig this year because I have been sick. I had the heart attack. I didn't want to travel. Um, and so I took on a ghostwriting gig, and I'm absolutely loving it. It's super fun. I get to do the good part, which is writing, and I don't have to do the part that makes me sick, which is going to events where people cough on me. With the lupus and the medicines I'm on, I catch everything. So for me, professional ghostwriting, honestly, I'd be tempted doing it full time. Because I think it's, I don't know, I think it's fun. I'm absolutely loving it. It's my first time doing it this year, but it was a decision I made because it alleviates the responsibility of promotion and that kind of stuff. And someone asked that about like if you're doing indie or trad, you're still promoting. Yeah, I'm still doing it. But what I can't do with indie, even okay, so I did a book called Cold Iron Heart, which was a prequel to Wicked Lovely, which has sold like 1,000,000 some copies. And I published it during the pandemic, indie. And I didn't do a whole lot of marketing, but I put it out there. My name helped sell it. But I found that a lot of the indie readership is not the trad readership. It's like they're two different stores,
Yeah.
and people don't generally cross the aisle between them. So I
Yeah.
had all these people that found my book in indie that were like, "Oh, do you have other books?" And I'm like, "Behold, my many, many books." And they said, "Oh, but those are published by New York," and weren't interested. Which was fine.
That's fascinating.
And when I sold the Remedial Magic, which came out like 2 or 3 years ago, I had taken a gap from doing adult and YA, sold that, and all these people are like, "Oh, you haven't published in years." I'm like, "Here's this picture book, here's this photography, here's this graphic novel, here's all these indie books," and they were like, "Oh, none of those count." So there really is a gap. So the difference is, where is your reader demographic? I don't think it's a question of which side is better. It's where are the readers for the thing you're writing, and where do you find them? What traditional gives me is Remedial Magic was in Target. What traditional gives me is Remedial, Reluctant. My two contemporary romances are in every Barnes and Noble across the country right now. They also give me an advance. I like that too. What they don't give me is the kind of promotion that people think publishers do. They print ARCs, they pay for the cover, they pay for the editing, they pay for the copy editing. They get it in stores, they get it in libraries. I can't do all that with most of my indie books without spending a lot of money. So it's not just how much money you bring in, it's how much money you're willing to spend out. And I'm willing to spend it out if that's where my reader demographic is. So it's thinking about where to find the people that read books just like yours. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And
Okay.
I want to kind of continue on with that in that line of questioning, because I find that the idea that there's that two distinct readerships have kind of grown up or come into being. One of which is geared towards reading, on the traditional side, and the other of which is geared toward reading on the indie side. And they don't cross over. That's what's kind of amazing to me. So what do you think are the distinctive characteristics of the readerships of these two different readerships? What separates them? What are they looking for that they're not finding in the other type of book?
I mean, in my opinion, what I see succeeding the best in KU, Kindle Unlimited, in a lot of the indie authors that explode, is these are for readers who want that escapist, immersive, like they're not gonna, for the most part, they're not gonna give you that email that says, I noticed that you used a dependent clause incorrectly. I get that sometimes in my trad books, and it makes me a little crazy. But in indie, it's like, when's the next book? Why is it not here? When can I have it?
Okay.
I think you get a lot of collectors in the indie market. We see that with Kickstarter. And I think that's where we see some of the crossover, because we see the Fairy Loot, the Illumicrate. I had an Illumicrate edition of the Wicked Lovely books. They're super pretty. And that's a demographic. And I think that demographic is the ones going to like a Polycon, all of those pop-up conventions. But then I think the people that are reading more of the sort of trad pub, the kind of books that get awards, are people that are like, okay, I'll wait a year and a half for the next book because I want it to be perfect. And so I think there's different expectations with different readerships. I think a lot of the people that are doing the collector books know that by the time a book comes out of the indie market into a collector edition, it's then going to be more polished and they want it on the shelf. But there are also people like my mom's one of those people. The woman will read like 10 books a week, and if you can get a subscription for that, she's reading so fast. It doesn't matter if there's typos in the same way that it does with a book that's printed on the shelf. People that are willing to pay more for it. I mean, it's draft beer versus microbrew. It's, American whiskey versus single malt from Scotland. I mean, it's just a different taste. Neither one's better. It's just, appetite. I think. Because I read both. I'm the weirdo that reads both. I have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, and I read books out of my library every week. And I also read a lot of award winners. So, I'm just a weirdo.
Let me grab another question here. And you've sort of answered this, but I'm going to ask it again anyway. How do agents approach diversification? Is it harder to get signed if you want to indie publish as well as traditional publish? Are there some agents who are open to this? Well, obviously yours is.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are more agents these days that are open to it. I know Nancy Yost publishes a couple of my friends. Or she's their agent, and she handles their indie books for them. Like she handles making sure there's covers, does the upload, takes the money down, does the forms. Like she does the agent stuff, even though it's indie books. My agency, I'm with Writer's House, does it a little differently. They would prefer me to go through them. But again, with my rule issues, I don't. So I just give them their cut. Like here. I mean, I give them the cut of the ghostwriting stuff too. And there are other agents that don't request that are just like, you do it on your own. That's your business. Just like, don't break your contract rules,
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's like necessarily pro or against it because the market is, I mean, it's just a reality now. Hybrid, which is what it's called when you're doing both, is realistic. I do think in some cases there are agents or editors who try and keep you busy enough that you cannot do both. And I have found that. And I have had offers where they're like, we're paying you a certain amount of money. We're paying you $100,000, and because we're paying you $100,000, you cannot indie publish. That
so
happens.
Is that written into your contract?
It was until I got rid of it with one of my
Mhm.
contracts
So
because
would that be
I
like
would
you could,
rather not sell. I would
yeah.
rather not sell than wear a leash.
So would that be like, you can't write something that's too similar to the book you're writing for us, or you can't write anything?
Theirs was I couldn't publish anything else until all the books for them were out.
Wow.
And
Wow.
that was a term that I fought against and
Yeah.
successfully. Um, because, you know, you can't guarantee when the book's going to release. The pandemic came and a bunch of my books were delayed a year.
Yeah.
If I had
Right.
had a clause like that, I would have had no money during the pandemic.
Hmm.
That would not be good.
No.
So, it's looking again, it's looking at how to approach this. And remember, you're a business person. Like, I think that is the biggest thing I want everyone to know. You are a business person. Finding your agent isn't finding the one, it's not dating, because if it is, you're in a poly relationship from go, because you are not their one and only. Same with a publisher. I love a lot of my editors, but I'm not monogamous because that is not how you treat a business. That'd be like saying I only sell my product to one person.
Hmm.
Like, and I understand that there are people that would prefer that. I prefer to have diversification of income streams in order to best provide for my family. It's
Yep.
that simple.
Yep.
It's a business.
Yeah. I think that's that's an important lesson. I mean, that's why we have the business track in the MFA, right? Is to the best of our ability prepare students for that part of the reality of what it means to be a professional writer.
I mean,
Um,
quite honestly, that's why I applied to teach at your program
mhm.
because you guys tackle the business. And I think it is nonsense for MFA programs to not approach it to think about business. I don't think business and marketing is superior to craft, but I think about the business. I think about marketing from the moment I start a new project. I start my pitch and I start my synopsis the same day I start writing that first chapter because I have to be able to monetize the story in order to do this for a living, which means that craft is simultaneous with market and business all
Mhm.
the time in my brain. If not, you end up having dry years where you sell no books.
Yeah.
And then, like, who's going to take care of my family?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. It's you got to bring home the bacon.
Yup.
Um, so along those lines, it kind of segues pretty nicely into this question here. With you being able to live off your writing, what does your day-to-day look like? How much time do you spend writing, marketing, and so on?
This is one of those don't do as I do kind of statements, I guess. I don't believe in writing every day. I just don't. Um,
Heresy.
I
No, just kidding.
I know. There are days I write 10,000 words and then I don't write for the next 10 days. When the story comes, I feel like a conduit and it flows out until I have to rub Voltaren, which is like a liquid Motrin stuff on my skin to make my hands uncurl. And sometimes I have to dictate because it's the only way to get the words out. And then there are days that, quite honestly, when I get off the phone with y'all, I'm going to go buy paint because I've got a wild hair that I want to paint the bedroom. So that's what happens when I don't have a deadline. I paint the bedroom or I build a new chicken coop. I was making cornbread earlier because I got a deal on some great cornmeal. My day is erratic. I get up when I get up. And when I know I'm going to have downtime, I actually email Paul and say, Paul, I need a class because
Yes,
if not, I'm going to be like
it's
seriously,
true.
what was, yeah, I'm gonna paint the outside of the house or something. So I like to keep my body active. I like to keep my brain active. I like to do something creative, whether that's painting the house or setting up my loom or getting out my swords or sitting out there and chatting with my chickens. I know that's weird, but I love my chickens. And so finding those things, finding those spaces to fill my brain And I read a ridiculous amount of nonfiction. I don't know if you can see the shelf behind me, but like the
Yes.
majority of this is all nonfiction.
Wow.
So I go to the Princeton University catalog about every 6 months, and I see if there's any new folklore or whatever books that might be interesting. I occasionally take Oxford University Press continuing ed classes. They had a really cool folklore one that was like 6 recorded lectures. Sometimes I travel. Like my daughter is an archaeologist. She's currently in South Africa, excavating in a cave at the tip of the continent. So I think I'm going to see her in Norway in the next 6 weeks, maybe, or maybe she's coming here. I don't know. Um, like I try to fill my brain so my stories are not like the same as everything else on the shelf. And I read
Hmm.
more nonfiction than fiction. And then I generally probably spend about a day, an hour or two each day looking at either marketing or book sales, making graphics. I make my own graphics because I like photography. So I do some graphics. I might do some social media posts. I check in and see if there's any interviews. I've got a backlog of interviews coming for my June release. I've got to book a flight for I just announced an hour or two before us, a signing in Florence, South Carolina, and I'm doing a signing in Florence, Italy, so I need flights for those.
The
So
Florences.
yeah, I'm on a Florence year. So I spend 2 or 3 hours a day dealing with all the kind of like email marketing publicity stuff. And then if it's a writing day, I turn the Wi-Fi off. And also behind me is a giant speaker. This room is completely wired in speakers. I crank the music. I typically
What do
write to
you what do you, what do you listen to?
Bach,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Bach's cello suites.
Okay.
Um, I don't know why, but they work. Cello works for my brain. So I turn on a mix of cello and forest sounds, depending on
Hmm.
where I am in the book. Forest works better for some books. And I just lock in and I write until my wife or child need me. And that's it. Like it's not scheduled. Hence the needing to sell books because that kind of schedule would not work if I had like a grown-up job.
Right. All right. Here's another question out of the chat. If you had
Okay.
to choose, this is a question nobody has ever asked before. It's a very interesting question. If you had to choose a genre track for yourself in the SNHU MFA, which one would you choose as someone who writes in multiple genres? And what advice would you have for somebody who's trying to decide?
I would take half of one class and half of another class, and I'm going to
Yeah.
pretend Paul can't hear me right now. I would look at who's teaching it, and I would
Yeah.
see if they are going to be useful to me for networking purposes.
And what does that mean? Like, how do you know if somebody's going to be useful to you for networking purposes?
Well, if I were writing a YA about fairy, for example, I might pick that chick that made her name on fairies. If I were writing sci-fi, I'd probably pick Beth Revis. I'm no good to you if you're planning to do sci-fi.
Hmm.
Um, so I would look and see like who do they know? Who
Right.
blurbs their books? Who's their editor? Who's their agent? Are they someone that like I have office hours every weekend for free to every student who's ever taken my classes to answer any marketing questions, any publicity, any craft, any pitching questions. Weirdly, only a handful of people come, but like if you have a teacher who's going to open some doors for you, like that's who
Right.
I'd pick. So
Yeah,
that's what I would do.
that makes
That's what
perfect
I would
sense.
do.
And I just
It's a
want to call.
business.
Well, that's just it. I want to call people's attention to the type of mind that is on display here. This is somebody who's thinking ahead, who's like geared towards success and is thinking in like a realistic way of like how can I make things happen? And it's not like I don't believe that Melissa is saying like see if you can glom onto this professor and take advantage of them. It's more like whose interests align with your own. When you look at what you think your career could be and what you want it to be, who's already gone down that road and who might be able to open some doors for you. And I can say, with complete confidence that every instructor in this program will be happy to open any door that they can for their students.
Yeah, I mean, if they have a repository of information that matches your particular interest line, that's where you go. And
Mhm.
part of that is thinking in terms of network. Like, I don't talk to everybody and their mother on social media because I'm off with the chickens or writing or teaching. But what I do have is I have 20 years of experience that I'm happy to share. So if something I'm doing, like with the multi-genres or trad, is useful, well, I'm a good choice. Beth, on the other hand, has done more self-publishing. She's doing co-authoring right now. I love Beth. I blurbed her first book, so she's my favorite example. We share an agent too. That's how I met her. She was with my agent. Her agent gave me her book. I blurbed it. I think The World of Beth Revis. And so if I were doing something more sci-fi, I'm useless to you with that. Like I just am. Like I love sci-fi, but I don't have those keys, right? But my editor for children's fiction is Nancy Paulson, who is one of the most respected literary editors in the business for children's fiction. Her books are just expected to get awards. I have no idea why she works with me. I'm like the redheaded stepchild, but that's useful if that's your direction, right? I have a friend who writes horror. She teaches and takes on mentees. I don't think she's in the program. I think she's in like applications. When I told her I was interested in going back to horror for a book, and she's like, okay, and actually just send an email during our conversation telling her agent, hey, Melissa's thinking about horror. I thought I'd give you a heads up. So now her editor is expecting when I write this horror novel that she's going to get first crack at it because we were just having tea. And that's how it works. That's why we talk about conferences. That's why we talk about networking. That's why you should be making connections with your peers. Like I wasn't asking her to do that, and she doesn't expect anything in return. But like the network part cuts down the waiting line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
absolutely. All right, I'm gonna pull. There's a persistent questioner. I'm gonna try to pull this question in here in a way that is sensible and useful. Okay, so here's a student who is writing uh, a novel that's about Christianity versus Santeria, and based on her own personal experience.
Excuse me.
And number one, she's uncertain how to think of that novel in terms of like I guess targeting it toward a readership and how it might be promoted. Would it be promoted as like a Christian fantasy, or would it be promoted as something like a dark fantasy? And then second, this is the same student that wants to be a ghostwriter and a professor. So they're kind of wondering like, how do I make my choice between
Right.
all of these possible futures? How do I know which is the thing that I really want to do or be?
Well, you don't ever have to pick just one thing. I'm 54 here in a couple months, and there is no way this is what I'm going to do forever. At some point, I'm going to switch gears. So don't ever feel like whatever choices you're making creatively lock you in for the rest of your life. Like, as long as you're breathing, you can make changes. I firmly believe that. Angel, I remember your book with the Santeria and the Christianity. I believe because you veer toward Christianity and you veer toward it in a like Christianity is the right path. That's something I would consider for Christian publishing.
Hmm.
If it had been just more like there's people of both faiths and you're not putting one as superior to the other, I think you lean more into like it's fantasy. I remember it. I remember the excerpts. Christian fantasy is a very narrow publishing market, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that. I have friends that did Wicca publishing. Ali Kandi, who, if you haven't read her, you should. Her first books were published with oh gosh, I don't know how it's a LDS publisher is what she initially published with. And then she published Match, was this huge sci-fi. And then from there, her last book, The Unwedding, was a Reese Witherspoon pick, and now she is teaching at Brigham Young. So she took that sort of trajectory where she started with more religious text, and then she did a sort of like commercial YA text, and then she did a more book club text, and now she's faculty at Brigham Young. So I mean, again, like there's not just a path, and if your path, if I recall correctly in your text, was more Christian, there are faith publishers. And that's not just Christian. Like I had a student that was doing Jewish fiction. There are publishers for that. So, like if you're doing something more niche, like look into some of those small presses. But please, guys, all of you, please, 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 when you get any kind of contract stuff from any small publisher, please, 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 please have someone look at the contract. Like so many of these contracts I'm seeing lately absolutely rip people off. Like, every book you write after this, we get first look on. That's not a fair clause. Or they expect you to give them, like some of these, like yes, you should not pay to be published. But some of them, even if you're not paying, if they're not giving you an advance, they could be good. But they're also ones that are really taking advantage of people's dreams. And I just, like, if I do nothing else during the program but encourage people to like, Authors Guild has a service. If you pay, it's like $12 a month or whatever to be a member. They'll look at contracts. Lots of people will help you with this.
Yeah, I mean, I am always willing to look at contracts from my former students, and probably even anybody in the MFA, really, if they want to reach out to me with a contract question. Happy to do that. So here's a question, and I wanted to, I mean, Melissa, we've got 9 minutes left. Once again, this
I like talking to you, man.
Chat has just zipped by. But what I want to do is kind of come back to the thesis, because I know, you teach the thesis courses quite a bit. And here's a question from somebody who has, I guess is in the thesis now. What is your advice for somebody who is stuck on thesis? Basically, the fires of inspiration have burned out and now they're lost. Should they run with a new idea?
Oh, well, to run with a new idea, you have to get the dean's permission, incidentally.
That's right. Correct.
However, one of the things I do recommend, and this is somewhere that I really want to stress, that I know your advisors are going to say, take each class one right after the other. But if you're at a place that you're not able to take the classes back to back to back, every term I'm suggesting to people that it's okay to take a gap term to just figure out what's going on with your book. Oftentimes, though, if you're stuck in a book, it's because you've taken a wrong turn, right? Picture it as a road trip. You're driving along, and you see the path, everything's going well, and all of a sudden, the road has ended. I've actually had this happen in California. Driving through the desert. This doesn't mean that I should keep going. It means I should back myself up until I figure out what that wrong turn is. And that is the same thing that I do myself 20 years in, 30 some books in. When I take a wrong turn, then I feel like I'm stuck. And that wrong turn is going to feel like I can't go forward on this path. Well, you can't go forward on that path because you're on a road with a dead end. So you need to back it up until you find where you took the wrong turn. Like, where was the major character plot decision that was the wrong one? And if all else fails with that, what I have all my students do is do an outline, like I call it a reverse outline. And I do this with my own books. I don't outline before I write, which makes me feel like a hypocrite because I'm supposed to tell students to do that. But nonetheless, I write and then I do the outline. And I've done this for my editors too. My editor wanted an outline, so I wrote like 40,000 words so I could write an outline. Because that's just how my brain works. But once I have the words written, I can do the outline. And when you look at the outline, you can see often where you're going off track. And that enables you to revise it more smoothly. And part B of that is, I mentioned earlier that I always write my synopsis as I'm drafting, Because if you can look at it, think of the synopsis like, when you see those like mini villages that people build of a building before they like do the whole construction project, your synopsis is a mini village. And if you can't see how the changes work and work effectively in a mini village, they're not going to work in the full scale project. So by doing a synopsis and or outline while you're drafting and going to that, you can usually get unstuck. And that's a lot of words. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, one thing that I want to add to that is I think a lot of times when a writer, especially if they've come a long way in their book already, they reach a point where they feel stuck and they feel like they don't know what's going on anymore, or they've lost the thread, or the fires of inspiration have burned out, or whatever. And they feel like they failed. They feel like it's a failure. But in fact, it's not a failure at all. What's happening, just like Melissa is saying, is like your unconscious or your subconscious mind, however you want to look at it, some part of you, the writer part of you, is saying, whoa, put on the brakes. You made a mistake. You went off track. You're going in the wrong direction. So really, when you run into that situation, you should be congratulating yourself, saying like, wow, I'm I am smarter than I thought because I know something's wrong. You might not know what's wrong yet, but you do know that something's wrong. And Melissa is also right, as she usually is, that
Occasionally is.
the solution is backwards. It's something that the solution to every problem in a book is in the book already. That's what I believe anyway. It's always to be found in what you've already written. It's there. The seed of it is there in your idea, the solution to any problem that the book will present you with. All right. So
I dropped a link in the chat because I see
great.
questions that I did not answer. That is my Zoom office hours. I do those for MFA students and a couple people who are former students over the years that pop in. To answer questions if I can. That is this Sunday's appointment. If anyone's interested, you obviously don't have to, but if you have a question that I have missed, I do 2 hours every week. I answer whatever I can. You will probably see dogs, cats, and my child interrupt the screen, which I made them not do tonight. But like I see a lot of questions I didn't get to. And
yeah, there were a lot. There was a ton of questions in here. I think
this is what I do.
Pretty well, really.
Yeah.
I think.
Oh yeah. But like I could answer questions forever, which is why I do this every Sunday. Because when I started doing this, I didn't know what I was doing, right? Like I was teaching literature for deployed Marines and sailors. I was homeschooling my kids. I wrote a book. Everyone says like you can't succeed at this. So I was not planning on what happened. And all of a sudden I'm on the New York Times. I'm supposed to be traveling to London. I was supposed to go to New York. I didn't own a passport. I'd never, this was all so overwhelming. So I was like looking at people and calling John Green, who I'd never met, saying, hi, I see you've done a tour. Tell me how book tours work. And a lot of people were really cool answering my questions. So like, I want to answer questions. So that's why I teach. That's all.
Yep. Well, and that's why you're such a great teacher. Gosh, I really wanted to delve a little more into the thesis courses. Let's just make it simple. One last question about the thesis. What is the one thing, or maybe the couple of things that students who are not in the thesis yet, but are about to enter the thesis, what do they need to know above everything else in order to succeed in the thesis courses?
Okay, you guys need to have something beyond a vague plan of what you want to do with this. Like I feel like so many of my students that succeed are the ones that come in and they've got their 15K they wrote during genre, but they also have like a start of what the book's about. They have a start of understanding where it is in the market. They're reading comps. They're preparing themselves because every single one of my students the other term said, I thought I could write more words per week than I could. And then when they got to like query letter, synopsis, pitch, they had no time to do it because they were behind on their words. So the further ahead you are, the better chance you have, right? So I just want to encourage you guys to try and like push yourself to be more prepared than you think you have to before you get there. And honestly, agents, if you're planning on trad at all, they need your first pages to be tight. You're going to get 5 to 7 pages, and after that, they're done with you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, coming in and being like, oh, I don't have a solid foundation. I don't have an inciting incident. Like my students that managed to get through my genre class with me and then come into my thesis, they're the ones that are a leg up because I made sure they had that in genre. So, like, if there's anything you can do to be like ready, the more, again, preparing, the more you get done in advance, the better off you'll be.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing that I'd like to add to that is the notion that, there's 3 thesis courses, but that doesn't mean that you've got 3 courses to write your novel. What it means is that you've got 2 courses to write your novel and 1 course to revise your novel. And of course, as Melissa just said, you're coming into the thesis with words under your belt, and hopefully as many as you can. Accumulate. But aim to be done with a solid draft of your novel by the end of 701, so that you can spend 702 rewriting it, basically.
And be reading whatever are your comp titles, whether they're indie or trad, right?
Yeah.
What you're doing with a comp title is you are telling the agent or the publisher or whomever you're talking to that you know this market, you know where you fit. And if you're coming in with books from 10 years ago, you don't know where you fit.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, whatever you're planning on targeting, you should be reading that. When you've got those down days, read the market you're trying to enter.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with that. And I mean, I guess one last thing before we go. Don't just read the mark. I mean, be diverse in your reading. I think it's important for writers to read a lot, but like Melissa says, those books behind her on the bookshelf, a lot of them are nonfiction.
All of them.
She's reading a lot of stuff that's outside of the genres in which she's writing. She's reading stuff inside. She knows the market, but she's also pulling from outside because that's the stuff that feeds you, right? When you deplete yourself in writing a novel, you got to replenish that from somewhere. And this is one way to do that.
Definitely.
Right.
But you also need to make sure that if you are claiming you're writing romantasy, you need to be looking at like what are the romantasy Reader's Choice nominees on Goodreads? What are the ones that are the top 10 in your market? Because you can't talk to an agent about what you're trying to do if you don't know what's happening in the market. Again, my Zoom is at 11 o'clock PST on Sundays. If you want to come, you can email me if you don't save that thing. You obviously don't have to come, but I see a bunch of questions I didn't answer. And if you want me to, I do. That's all.
Okay, that's very generous. Thank you so much, Melissa, for sharing your wisdom with us tonight. And thanks to everyone who came. Next Wireside Chat coming up in April 2nd. It's always the second Monday of the month, 8 to 9. And we'll have a successful alum who just sold her first novel, or her first novel is just pubbing, and she'll be back to read a little bit from it and talk to us about it. So hope to see you all there. More information coming. And Melissa, thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for letting me be here and teach and all that.
Of course. All right. Good night, everyone.
Bye, guys.